Hi guys, today's video is going to be all about Al Capone, the famous 1920s gangster. We're starting out our 1920s unit with talking about gangsters and gangs, and tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about the inner workings of a gang. But today's video is all about Al Capone. So growing up, Al Capone wasn't the best behaved kid. His parents were immigrants from Italy, and he had a history in school of skipping school. He was attending a Catholic school at the time, and when he was a little bit older, he actually gets expelled from his school because he punched a teacher. So not the best origin story. And he actually leaves school after, obviously he gets expelled, he leaves school, and he starts joining gangs and committing petty crimes, just small crimes around the city of New York. So that is Al Capone as a kid. He gets the nickname Scarface from when he was working as kind of like a bouncer at the Harvard Inn, which is no longer at Coney Island, but he gets these scars on his face because he unintentionally insulted a woman. I don't know if he was like catcalling her or something like that. This woman's brother takes out a knife and basically slashes his face like 3 times. So he does have 3 scars on his face, and he has, those scars for the rest of his life. He gets this name Scarface, and he hates this nickname. He hates it so much that he makes up this story that they're actually from the war, that when he served in the war, he got these battle scars, but actually he never even served in the war. So it just shows what lengths he went to try and hide the story of this scar, or these scars, excuse me. So he actually spent most of his life, when he would be photographed by the press or photographed in general, he would turn his head to the other side so that people could not see these scars on his face. And there's a rare picture of his scars. You can kind of see him right here. So he moves to Chicago. That's kind of the city where he's famous for. And he is encouraged to move to Chicago by this man, Johnny Torrio, who was an enforcer for James Big Jim Colosimo at the time. And basically he's working as like a bouncer, and kind of like not a bouncer, but like kind of like a rough and tumble guy. And but James Big Colosimo actually dies, which leaves Johnny Torrio to take over for him. So Capone actually becomes Johnny Torrio's right-hand man in leading this gang. So this is how Al Capone becomes the boss. So we have Johnny Torrio almost get killed, and asks Capone to kind of take over for him. So he's only 26 at the time, so he's like a little boss baby, but he's very experienced after his years doing, gangs and being involved in gangs in New York. And throughout his time as boss, he's actually a huge patron for jazz and jazz musicians. And he opens these speakeasies, which at the time, serving alcohol was illegal because of the 18th Amendment. So he opens these speakeasies and kind of distributing alcohol to be sold in these speakeasies. And they're speakeasies we'll talk about tomorrow, but they're basically like hidden bars. And you see a lot of them, like they'll be hidden behind bookshelves or secret doors to try and get to these places because it was illegal to distribute alcohol. But he becomes this huge patron of jazz music, really a big supporter of jazz music, which thrives in these speakeasies and kind of comes to prominence because of Capone opening and providing these speakeasies with alcohol so that people go and see these musicians. He's such a huge patron of the arts that one jazz musician, he's a pianist, Earl Hines, Capone actually gives him a police escort. Another story depicts Johnny Dodds, who's this famous clarinetist, I believe. Capone actually gives him $100 to learn a song that he didn't know, and he actually gives him $50 at the beginning and says you'll get the other half when you learn the song. So he was a huge patron of jazz music. And another good thing that Capone did, obviously being a gangster, he did a lot of bad things, a lot of wrong things, but he did actually open up a soup kitchen, meaning like during the Depression era, he opened up this place where the poor or the unemployed could go and get a hot meal. And there's this story that I read of Capone wanting to host like a Thanksgiving dinner, and he wanted to have like turkey and all that stuff, for the poor to eat. But there was actually a story or a newspaper article that came out about this theft, that somebody had stole a bunch of turkeys, and he was worried that if he put on this Thanksgiving dinner that he would be tied to that crime. So they ended up just having beef stew instead. But he did have the soup kitchen. He was never like seen at the soup kitchen, but it was funded by his gang. So here we have the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. This was a job thought to be played out by Capone's gang against his rival Bugs Moran. But first, let's introduce our people, our gang leaders. We have the South Side, Al Capone, South Side of Chicago. He's leading that gang. Then we have the North Side, who that gang is led by George Bugs Moran. He originally of this whole massacre had been the intended target, but he actually avoided the massacre because he was running late, and he actually spotted the assailant's vehicle parked outside the garage. So he was kind of tipped off, and he was running late. So I guess lucky for him. The weapons were 2 Thompson submachine guns and 2 shotguns that were used in this massacre. Here we have the victims, primarily all of Moran's gang. We have Adam Heyer. He was working as an accountant of the Moran mob. Frank Gusenberg, an American contract killer. So he would be, contracted out to kill people. Worked for Moran. He died of his gunshot wounds 3 hours later. His brother, Peter Gusenberg, was also a contract killer. So the family business, I guess. And he died in this massacre as well. James Clark, he was the enforcer, kind of the muscle for Bugs Moran, and he passes away because of this massacre. We have John May, an auto mechanic who worked for Bugs Moran. A lot of times I feel like we don't think of gangs needing auto mechanics, but they do need, cars and someone to work on the cars, and you can't necessarily trust just anyone. So unfortunately, his auto mechanic dies in this massacre. Albert Weinshank, he was the business operator for Bugs Moran. We'll talk about tomorrow how a gang is basically like a business and has different jobs within the business to kind of keep it up and running. But Albert Weinshank was that business operator for Moran who dies in this massacre. No picture available for Reinhard Schwimmer, but he was basically an I can't say this word, guys. Basically like an obstetrician, optician, basically a guy who makes glasses, all that for a guy that makes glasses, who was friends with Bugs Moran, who hung out with their gang, not necessarily a member, but hung out with the gang. He was killed in this massacre. Oh, okay. Also, this, don't cry, okay? But this made me almost cry when I made this slide. That auto mechanic had a dog. His name was Highball, and he was leashed to the axle of a truck in the garage during the whole massacre, during the whole shooting. He was so traumatized by watching all this, watching his owners die, right, watching his owner's friends die, that he had to be put down. He could not be rehabilitated. So it's very, very sad. It was suspected, here's the deal, it was suspected but never proved that Al Capone ordered the massacre. They never are able to prove that he did it. There's suspicions, but obviously, but not concrete evidence to prove that Al Capone ordered this massacre. So you may be wondering, what did the police do? What did they catch him for? What did they arrest him for? He got arrested for tax fraud. This is very funny to me because we have this guy, Al Capone, who's done numerous crimes, killed numerous people, okay, through his gang, but they catch him on tax fraud. And how they catch him is they have people going through, like, combing through his tax returns, okay, combing through tax returns, seeing that if he paid his income tax, which is by the 16th Amendment, okay, they had to prove that his gang was like a business of some sort, and they had to prove that he was not paying income tax within his business. So they catch him on tax fraud. He's initially arrested and taken to a prison. He's sentenced to 11 years. He's the first prison that he's sentenced to is actually near his home. So his mom can come and give him, baked goods, they said, which is nice to have your mom visit. But then he's moved later to this nice, cozy hotel room-like prison, which is interesting because prison, we don't think of that as like a nice hotel room. And you can go visit this, they've preserved it. But then he's taken to Alcatraz, which had just opened up at the time. So it was kind of like a publicity stunt for the government. They took him to Alcatraz because they could tell the public, like, oh, this is the toughest prison in the whole country. Even, people like Al Capone are being held here. So that is his journey from a really, really nice place and his mom being able to visit to terrible conditions in Alcatraz. And I have this quote from this comic. I don't even know who this is, but this is a really good quote for right now. If you go to jail for tax evasion, you're living literally off of the taxes of citizens as a result for not paying taxes. So I think it's pretty ironic that he goes to prison, which is funded federally by taxes, because he didn't pay his taxes. He later, in his final years, he gets taken out of or released from Alcatraz because of his worsening condition due to syphilis. So earlier in his younger years, he had contracted syphilis. And if you don't know, syphilis can eat away at your brain if it's not treated early on. And he could have had it treated early on. That did exist at this time, but he didn't for some reason or another. And it really, really incapacitates him in his later years. There's a movie, it's called Capone. It's with the guy, I don't know if you've seen Venom. I haven't, because that movie's too scary for me, but I've seen the trailer. And the guy that plays Venom actually plays Al Capone in his last year of life. So it's really interesting to see his mental state deteriorate. By the end, he had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old. He would say that he saw visions or saw his old enemies, and try and fire at them. Obviously, they took his guns away after that, but he retires and passes away in this Florida home that was up for sale recently. But here is some pictures, modern pictures, but you can kind of get the vibe. It was a nice place. Okay, that is our lecture on Al Capone. I hope you enjoyed that, and please research him. You can do your paper on him. You can use any of these slides, any of this information that I've said in this video. in your paper, but make sure you check Google Classroom tomorrow because we'll have another video on kind of the inner workings of gang and, you know, the 1920s in general. I can't talk. I need to stop this video. All right. See you guys later.